Oh man. Anything else you want to add, Wesley?
Honestly, man, I'm looking forward to the season, man.
Yeah. So tell listeners how you plan on, as a co-host. What's your plan?
Well, honestly, I think what we can do this year is we're gonna have a joint podcast once a week. It may run, a little over an hour long, hour 30, maybe a top.
Yeah.
But we're gonna touch over, the previous week, upcoming week, news with rosters, injuries, everything and anything. That's the main thing we're gonna be touching on. We do plan on having guests this year.
Yep, definitely.
Like Swa already mentioned, we're not starting our power rankings until after season week 4.
Yeah.
Gives us a chance to kind of see what the roster is looking like.
Yeah.
And we can go from there.
Yeah. And as far as guests, we of course we're gonna give the guests heads up. We want different guests up in the podcast. Last year I tried to do that. I didn't get some people on the podcast, but this year I do want different guests up there. Like Jack, I do want to hear you on the podcast. Who else? RD, I do want to have you on the podcast. So I do want have everybody that wasn't in the podcast last season to be on the podcast. Avery, I do want you on the podcast. So no pressure on you guys. I do want you guys. I do want everybody else to hear you guys' voice on the podcast. And everybody else, you guys know I'll set up a day you guys will be on the podcast. Calvin, last season you was my championship co-host. You was the playoff co-host or the playoff host of the podcast. And we'll see how everything goes. But the guys that have been on the podcast, I do want to have you guys on the podcast. So that's why I want to put that out there. The originators, you guys gonna have your time on the podcast. Don't be scared. Don't feel worried. You guys gonna have your time on the podcast. But other than that, Wesley, I don't have nothing else to add, man.
Stay tuned for the next one.
It's good.
Next one.
Hey, Hamburger's out.